What if I told you that everything around you, your routine, your work, your habits, even your desires, weren't really chosen by you? That there's an invisible, sophisticated system designed to make sure you never become everything you could be? Modern society doesn't want you to be exceptional. It wants you to be average, conformed to, easy to control. From an early age, we are taught to follow rules, to think like everyone else, to not question. Work, consume, obey. But never stop to reflect on whether this path really makes sense. The problem? Mediocrity has a very high cost, not just for your career, but for your mind, your happiness, and your life as a whole. You feel it, that feeling of always being busy, but never fulfilled, as if something were missing, as if your life were stuck in an automatic routine, with no real purpose. And this is not an individual problem, it's been programmed. Modern society structures everything so that critical thinking disappears, so that creativity dies, so that no one questions the system. And what's worse, it works. Most people become prisoners of this model without even realizing it. But what if there was another way to live? What if you could escape this forced mediocrity and access a standard of living that most people will never experience? In this video, we'll take apart how modern society forces us into mediocrity, what the signs are that you're falling into this trap, and, most importantly, how you can break free and finally take control of your life. If you want to understand why most people will never become exceptional and how you can avoid that fate, then stick around until the end, because once you see this truth, you'll never see the world the same way again. Imagine that from the moment you were born, someone put a veil over your eyes. This veil is invisible, but it distorts everything you see. It makes you believe that your life should follow a predetermined path. Study, work, produce, consume, and, if you have time, have a bit of fun before getting back into the routine. But what if I told you that this reality you call life is just a limited version of what really exists? The writer Hermann Hesse used to say that reality is the thing we have to worry about the least, because it will always be there, surrounding us. The problem is that we've been trained to see only a fragment of it, the one that interests the system. We've been taught to focus on the tangible, the productive, the measurable. Everything needs to have a practical purpose: money, status, material goods. But what happens when we reduce life to a mere succession of tasks and obligations? The answer is simple. We become parts of a larger mechanism without ever questioning whether it makes sense. From an early age, society trains us to be efficient, but not thinkers, obedient, but not creative. We work tirelessly, but never have time to reflect on why we're doing it. And so we become slaves to a routine we didn't choose, while our minds become accustomed to a constant state of numbness. Does this sound familiar? Waking up early, rushing to work, facing a day of repetitive tasks, coming home tired, getting distracted by some screen and going to sleep, only to repeat it all the next day. Modern life has become an endless loop where the only function of the individual is to produce and consume. And the scariest thing, this condition is not a flaw in the system, it's its purpose. Modern society was built so that no one has time to think. The last thing the system wants is a questioning, conscious individual who is impossible to manipulate. That's why everything is designed to keep your mind busy and distracted. You never stop. You never reflect. You never question. You just go with the flow. In the movie The Truman Show, the main character discovers that his entire life was a farce. A reality show where everything was meticulously controlled. Every person around him, every situation he experienced, every choice he made, everything was manipulated to keep him inside a prefabricated world without him ever realizing it. But what if somehow we too are trapped inside a carefully constructed scenario? A system that deceives us, keeps us busy, gives us the feeling of freedom, but never really allows us to step outside the boundaries that have been set for us? Plato was already talking about this more than 2,000 years ago with his famous myth of the cave. Just like in the movie, in the myth, a group of people live chained inside a cave, believing that the shadows projected on the wall are reality. They have never seen the outside world, so they don't know that there is anything beyond those shadows. But one day, one of the prisoners escapes and discovers the truth. The world is much bigger than he imagined. What happens when he returns to tell the others? They laugh. They say he's gone mad. They refuse to believe that there is anything beyond what they know. And that's exactly how society treats those who dare to question the system. Anyone who goes off the beaten track is called naive, inconsequential, or out of touch with reality. But the great truth is that the reality we are being sold is just one part of a much larger whole. The question is, how many will have the courage to break out of this illusion and seek something beyond? And more importantly, are you ready to see? Wake up, work, pay bills, sleep, and repeat it all over again the next day. Life goes by like this, and one day you realize that time has slipped away. Dreams were postponed. Opportunities went unnoticed. This happens because no one ever taught you how to see the game of life the right way. But there is another path. If you want to reach the next level, you need to access new knowledge. And that's exactly what you'll find in the White Rabbit Codes. This book will open your eyes to what is really happening. You'll understand why you keep getting stuck in the same cycles, learn how to escape autopilot, and start seeing the opportunities that were always there. And finally, you'll make decisions that truly lead to the life you've always wanted. If you feel ready for this change, the link is in the pinned comment. You'll be surprised at how simple it can be to increase your prosperity. Success is a decision. The choice is yours. We live in the information age, but we have never been so lost. It's never been easier to access knowledge, and paradoxically, it's never been harder to find meaning. Every second, notifications vie for our attention. Tasks pile up, deadlines get shorter. We're always busy, always chasing something. But at the end of the day, what have we really achieved? Psychologist Stephen James Bartlett has described this phenomenon as unhealthy normality. He explains that many people believe they are living healthily simply because they are following the social norm. They work, pay bills, have fun at weekends, but deep down they experience an emptiness they can't name, a silent weariness, a feeling that something essential is missing, but which is impossible to identify. This is because the human mind is not designed for this constant overload. Modern society doesn't allow us to stop. Every minute needs to be filled with some activity, some distraction. Silence has become uncomfortable, introspection has become a luxury that few allow themselves. After all, if we stop to think long enough, we might discover that we're just spinning in circles. The problem is that this hyperstimulation doesn't just make us tired, it makes us superficial. When everything is quick, disposable, and immediate, we lose the ability to delve deeper. Our attention becomes fragmented, our patience disappears, our thinking becomes shallow. The consequence? We live without really living. Modernity has turned life into a treadmill. We run all the time but never leave our seats. Social networks offer an endless stream of information but rarely make us really think. Entertainment is always within reach, but deep down it only distracts us from what we should be facing. Nietzsche said that he who has a why faces any how. But what if that's precisely the problem with modern society? The lack of a why. Without a greater meaning, without a real purpose, we become easy prey for anything that occupies our minds, even if it empties us from the inside. The result is a cruel paradox. We are more connected than ever, but feel more isolated than ever. We have more access to information, but less wisdom, more comfort, but less satisfaction. And while our minds remain saturated but empty, the system grows stronger. After all, a society of distracted individuals never questions anything. It never rebels. It never changes. The brutal truth is that this mental saturation isn't a side effect of modernity, it's a tool of control. When you're constantly distracted, with no time to reflect, no energy to question, you become predictable, easy to manipulate. But that's only part of the problem. Mediocrity doesn't just settle in the mind. It also affects people's emotions and even their character. Because when an entire society is molded to avoid deep thought, it also becomes emotionally fragile and morally passive. And that's where the real trap closes. In the next chapter, we'll see how this mediocrity is not only intellectual, but also emotional and moral, and how these three forces together create a society of docile, conforming individuals incapable of challenging the system. Mediocrity doesn't take hold all at once. It advances silently, layer by layer, until the individual, without realizing it, becomes incapable of thinking independently, feeling deeply, and acting authentically. It infiltrates the mind, the emotions, and the character. And the more these three pillars are weakened, the more predictable and controllable the person becomes. This is the true purpose of mediocrity, to turn individuals into interchangeable parts within the system. We live in a world where all information is just a click away. But ironically, we have never been so superficial. Today, most people don't seek to understand, only to confirm what they already believe. The Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset described this mentality in his book, The Rebellion of the Masses. According to him, mediocre people don't feel the need to learn because they believe they already know enough. He doesn't question, he doesn't delve deeper, he doesn't reflect. He just absorbs ready-made opinions and repeats them uncritically. The system encourages this. Schools don't teach people to think, but to memorize. Public debate is not about ideas, but about who shouts the loudest. Culture encourages easy, disposable entertainment. All the time, we are encouraged to avoid any thought that requires real effort. And so, little by little, intellectual mediocrity sets in. People start living on autopilot, accepting any narrative without question. The world becomes predictable, binary, and comfortable. And critical thinking, the only weapon capable of breaking this cycle, becomes increasingly rare. But mediocrity doesn't just affect the mind, it also weakens the emotions. Modern society has trained us to seek immediate pleasure and avoid any kind of suffering. Whenever something bothers us, we rush to anesthetize the pain with distractions. Social media, series, shopping, food, quick dopamine. But this doesn't solve the problem, it just postpones the inevitable. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why faces any how." But what happens when someone doesn't have a why? They become hostages to their own feelings. Any frustration becomes unbearable. Any difficulty seems like an injustice. Any discomfort is seen as a reason to give up. And so a paradox arises. People are more sensitive than ever, but also emptier, unable to deal with criticism, to sustain deep relationships, to face long-term challenges. The problem? Without emotional resilience, no one grows. Suffering is part of building character. Great achievements require sacrifice. No transformation happens without pain. But modern society has eliminated this principle, conditioning us to seek comfort above all else. The result? Entire generations who have never developed enough emotional strength to sustain a purposeful life. If intellectual mediocrity prevents people from thinking, and emotional mediocrity makes them fragile, the final stage of the process is even more dangerous: moral mediocrity. Here, what is at stake is not just the mind or the emotions, but the very identity of the individual. Psychiatrist Carl Jung warned about this in his work, The Self and the Unconscious. For him, the greatest risk to humanity is when the individual dissolves into the masses, when someone has no principles of their own, when they don't act according to their values, but just follow what everyone else follows, think what everyone else thinks, do what everyone else does. And this doesn't happen by chance. Society rewards those who conform and punishes those who dare to be different. Independent thinking is discouraged. The courage to question is seen as arrogance. The desire to grow and stand out is treated as selfishness. Thus, little by little, the individual is extinguished. They give up their convictions in order to be accepted. They give up their authenticity so as not to be judged. They learn that the safest path is to follow the group, even if it means betraying themselves. And so the triad is complete: shallow mind, fragile emotions, submissive character. This is the fate of the majority. Not because they chose it, but because they were trained for it. The triad of mediocrity, intellectual, emotional, and moral, doesn't happen by chance. It's not just a mistake or an unintended consequence of modernity. It is encouraged, nurtured, and protected by the system itself. What most people don't realize is that mediocrity isn't just tolerated, it's rewarded. Modern society has created a model where questioning is dangerous, standing out is arrogant, and striving for excellence is a waste of time. Meanwhile, those who go with the flow, who don't challenge anything, who accept the rules without thinking, are the ones who do best. The system doesn't just expect you to be mediocre, it gives you reasons to stay that way. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. The modern world has created a cruel paradox. Those who think for themselves, who question, who seek to go beyond, are seen as a threat. Meanwhile, those who follow the rules without question, who accept mediocrity as the norm, are rewarded. Sound like an exaggeration? Then look around you. Who thrives in the workplace? Who is more socially accepted? Who receives more incentives to continue on the path they're already on? The system doesn't just tolerate mediocrity, it turns it into a virtue. From childhood, we are conditioned not to challenge the rules. At school, creativity is discouraged. Students who ask too many questions are seen as inconvenient. Those who question the rules are considered problematic. Standardization is the priority, and any attempt to break out of this mold is quickly pruned. The result? Whole generations of people who learn from an early age that thinking on your own isn't worth it, that it's better to go with the flow, that it's safer to conform. In the job market, this pattern intensifies. Who grows the most in companies? Those who obey without challenging. Those who don't challenge the structure. Those who do what they're told without questioning whether it makes sense. Innovation is promoted only on the surface, within well-defined boundaries, which ensure that the system is never really threatened. Those who dare to break with mediocrity are quickly isolated, labeled difficult, rebellious, or simply ignored. And it's not just in the professional environment. Socially, conformism is valued. Those who follow trends, who consume what everyone else consumes, who think within the same pre-established molds, are well accepted. But anyone who dares to be different, who seeks the extraordinary, who refuses comfortable mediocrity, quickly becomes the target of criticism and resistance. Society itself makes sure that no one steps out of line. This dynamic is intentional. A population that thinks, that challenges, that constantly seeks to evolve is not convenient for the system. Mediocre people are easier to control. They follow orders without resistance. They accept ready-made narratives without question. They buy what they are told to buy. They work where they are told to work. They live predictable, repetitive lives without ever really realizing that their choices were never entirely their own. But the most perverse thing about it all, the system makes those who are complacent feel good about themselves. They are encouraged to believe that they are on the right track, that they don't need to change, that pursuing something greater is a waste of time. Meanwhile, those who see mediocrity as a problem are constantly discouraged. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called this the pride of the mediocre, a psychological mechanism in which mediocrity itself becomes a source of pride, where people who have never challenged anything feel superior to those who try to change the game. And so mediocrity perpetuates itself. It becomes the norm. The exception is seen as the mistake. The system doesn't need to imprison anyone. It just needs to ensure that the population itself controls and discourages those who try to go beyond the average. The question that remains is, if everything around you is encouraging you to remain mediocre, how do you escape it? How can you break this cycle and regain autonomy over your own life? Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the Super Thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. Mediocrity is not an inevitable fate. It is a prison, yes, but a prison with open doors. The problem is that most people don't realize they can get out, or are afraid of what they'll find outside. All our lives, we've been conditioned to believe that it's safe to take the easy way out, that it's better not to question, not to challenge, not to try something different. But this security is an illusion. True freedom only exists for those who have the courage to break with the system and take control of their own lives. Escaping mediocrity is not just a matter of desire, it's a matter of action. The first step is to recover what the system has tried to erase in you: critical thinking. As long as you passively accept everything that is imposed on you, be it in the media, education, or social norms, you will remain just one more in the crowd. The difference between a trapped mind and a free mind is not in what it knows, but in how it questions. To break out of intellectual mediocrity, you need to stop consuming knowledge superficially and start looking for depth. This means reading books that challenge your beliefs, studying subjects that require effort, learning to think independently. But the mind alone is not enough. You also need to strengthen your emotions. We live in an age where discomfort is seen as something to be avoided at all costs. But without facing difficulties, without enduring frustration, without learning to deal with pain, there will never be any real growth. Great achievements require sacrifice. If you want to get out of mediocrity, you need to be willing to bear the weight of evolution. This means accepting criticism without getting upset, persisting even when everything seems difficult, building emotional resilience so you don't give up at the first hurdle, and above all, you need to rebuild your character. The system teaches us to follow the crowd, to seek acceptance instead of authenticity. But no one who has left their mark on history has done so simply by fitting in. You need to choose between being accepted or being exceptional. This means developing non-negotiable values, acting according to your own principles, and above all, having the courage to be different. The price of authenticity may be temporary loneliness, but the price of conformity is a lifetime without purpose. The way out of mediocrity is not comfortable. It requires effort, discipline, and above all, the willingness to let go of everything that keeps you stagnant. This can mean changing your habits, rethinking your relationships, and reevaluating your choices. Not everyone is ready for this transformation, but those who are will find a level of freedom and fulfillment that most people will never know. By now, you've realized that mediocrity isn't just a fluke. It's a project, a model carefully designed to ensure that you never think too much, never question too much, never take too many risks. A system that rewards conformism, that distracts your mind, weakens your emotions, and erases your individuality. Most people will spend their entire lives unaware of this invisible prison. But now you've seen the bars. And once you see the truth, there's no turning back. The world will try to pull you back. It will try to convince you that the search for something greater is pointless, that the best thing to do is to conform. But now you know that this security is an illusion. Mediocrity may be comfortable, but it will never be enough for those with a restless spirit, for those who feel they were born for something beyond the obvious, beyond the predictable. So the final question is not whether the system will keep trying to trap you. It will. The question is, will you keep looking at the ground, or will you finally lift your eyes? And before you answer, think about it. If you do nothing, where will you be in 5 years' time? If you continue to live on autopilot, accepting the same conditions, going with the flow like everyone else, what will your fate be? The truth is that there is no neutrality in this choice. Either you become the protagonist of your own story, or you remain an extra in someone else's narrative. Time will pass anyway, but who will you be when it does? What scares you more, the effort to change or the regret of never having tried? If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.